A poor nurse gave her only doll to a sick girl, not knowing she was the daughter of a CEO's single dad. I don't want to sleep. What if I don't wake up? Emily's heart clenched as the tiny voice trembled from beneath the blankets. The hospital room was dimly lit, the only sounds being the rhythmic beep of monitors and the soft December wind brushing against the windows. It was just past midnight, and the pediatric wing had settled into an uneasy quiet. All except for room 412. Inside, a 6-year-old girl named Sophie, pale, wide-eyed, and gripping the edge of the sheets like a lifeline, lay curled on her side, trying to hide her fear behind a brave face. She was scheduled for open-heart surgery at dawn. Emily, 24, pulled a chair closer to the bed. Her blonde hair, tied back in a loose ponytail, was beginning to fray from hours of moving between patients. She reached out slowly, gently brushing a strand of hair away from the girl's tear-soaked cheek. "Sweetheart," she said softly. "You are so brave. I promise the doctors will take excellent care of you." The girl shook her head. What if I don't wake up and mommy's not here? What if my heart just stops? Emily swallowed hard, her throat tightening with the familiar sting of helplessness. She had whispered those same words once, too, long ago, alone in a hospital bed when she was only 5 years old. Her own mother's voice had been the last comfort she remembered before surgery. And then, her mother never came back. She glanced down at her bag on the floor, then slowly reached inside. Her fingers hesitated, brushing over worn fabric, soft from years of being held. Then, she lifted it out. It was a doll, small and hand-stitched, with a faded pink dress and a single button eye. One of its ears had been resewn so many times it sat crooked. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she brought it into the dim light. "I had a doll just like this when I was your age," she said gently. "Actually, it was this one." The girl turned her head, her curiosity momentarily eclipsing her fear. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, carefully placing the doll into the child's small hands. "My mom gave her to me the night before I had surgery. She told me that as long as I held her, I wouldn't be alone. And I wasn't." "Not really." The little girl stared at the doll. "Is she magic?" Emily managed a smile, though her voice cracked. "Maybe not the kind of magic with wands. But she's been with me through everything. She's good at being brave when I'm not." A pause settled between them. The child's hands closed slowly around the soft fabric. "Can she stay with me tonight?" she whispered. Emily nodded. "She's yours now. Just until you're strong enough to give her back." The girl clutched the doll to her chest. And for the first time that night, her breathing steadied. Her eyes fluttered shut, her lashes damp against her pale cheeks. And within minutes, sleep took her gently, like a wave receding from the shore. Emily sat back, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her eyes lingered on the small, fragile figure under the blankets, the doll's stitched smile peeking from beneath her arms. She did not notice the figure standing just beyond the glass wall of the room. Nicholas Crane stood frozen, his hand resting on the metal doorframe, watching through the narrow pane of glass. He had come straight from a late board meeting, expecting to find his daughter asleep. He had not expected to witness this. A nurse giving away what was clearly her only comfort. A stranger humming softly to his child as if she had known her forever. His chest tightened with an unfamiliar, sharp emotion. At 34, Nicholas Crane was not a man known for sentiment. He had built an empire in tech, ran meetings like clockwork, and had long ago stopped expecting the world to surprise him. After losing his wife 3 years ago, his life had narrowed to two things: his work and keeping his daughter alive. There was no space for tenderness. No room for small, aching moments like this. Yet here he was, unmoving, his breath shallow, watching as the nurse with the tired eyes placed a blanket higher over his daughter's shoulders and gently kissed her forehead like a promise. He blinked and turned away as the hallway light flickered. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another contract. Another acquisition. But for once, he ignored it. Back in room 412, Emily sat alone beside the sleeping girl, her fingers absent-mindedly tugging at the hem of her scrubs. The space in her bag where the doll used to be felt empty. But her heart, oddly, did not. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered almost to herself, "I hope she keeps you safe." Far down the corridor, Nicholas paused at the elevator. He didn't know her name yet. But tonight, something in him had shifted. Kindness that asks for nothing, especially from someone who has little left to give, is not easily forgotten. And he would remember that doll, that look, that girl, even if she never knew he was there. The morning after the surgery, the air in room 412 was quieter, more fragile. The storm of fear had passed. But in its place was the soft hum of uncertainty that lives in recovery wings, where strength is measured breath by breath. Emily stood at the foot of the bed, her chart in hand, her eyes focused on the little girl who now slept more than she spoke. Tubes trailed gently from her arms. Her cheeks were still pale, but her chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm. That alone was progress. By mid-morning, the child stirred. Emily was already there, crouched beside the bed with a small bowl of applesauce and a spoon that had a cartoon bear on the handle. "Hey, sunshine," she whispered. "Still with me?" The girl blinked slowly, then gave a faint nod. "Think you can try a bite?" Her lips trembled. "Only if you stay." Emily smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." She fed her slowly, patiently, wiping her mouth with the gentleness of someone who knew what it meant to be vulnerable and afraid. Between bites, she hummed soft Lino lyrics. Just a tune that filled the sterile room with something human. Later that afternoon, she brought in a thin paperback and settled gently onto the edge of the bed. The child looked up, eyes wide. "Want to hear a story?" she asked. Sophie nodded. "Only if you read it like it's a movie." Emily chuckled. "Deal." She read aloud with different voices and dramatic pauses, exaggerating the silly parts until the girl giggled softly. Her first real laugh since the surgery. When she finished the last page, the girl turned to Emily, her eyes brighter now. "Do you think my heart's fixed now?" Emily placed a hand over hers. "I think your heart's braver than ever." Every hour, she checked her vitals, adjusted the 4, and brushed the girl's hair back from her forehead. When the child cried from pain, Emily didn't flinch. She simply sat beside her, held her hand, and said, "It's okay to cry. It just means you're still fighting." Outside the room, Nicholas came and went in silence. He spoke little to the staff, observing from behind the glass. On the second evening, he stood outside longer than usual, watching Emily tuck Sophie in with practiced care. Her movements weren't clinical. They were maternal, protective. She placed the faded doll carefully under the girl's arm again, smoothing its little dress with her thumb. The girl whispered something inaudible, and Emily leaned down to listen, nodding and brushing her cheek before standing. Nicholas's hands clenched in his coat pockets. He had hired nurses before. Nannies. Therapists, professionals paid well to care for his daughter while he worked, traveled, and built an empire in his wife's absence. But none of them had ever been like her. They had never knelt at his daughter's bedside just to make her laugh. They had never stayed past their shift to hold back a child's fear. And yet here was this young nurse. Her shoes worn, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, giving more of herself than anyone he had ever paid. That night in the break room, Emily sat alone with a paper cup of tea and a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in foil. Her shift was far from over. She unfolded the sandwich, looked at it, then rewrapped it again. She pulled her backpack closer and dug through it, retrieving a small lunchbox where she had tucked away leftovers from the children's ward kitchen, scraps of rice and a few steamed vegetables. Nicholas saw it from the hallway. He didn't know what moved him more, the way she worked tirelessly without recognition, or the way his daughter now called her Miss M, a nickname she'd made up because Emily was too long to say when sleepy. That same nickname had shown up in his daughter's drawings the next day, a stick figure with yellow hair and a pink triangle dress, holding hands with a little girl and a doll. He stared at it for a long time. The days blurred. Emily stayed by the child's side as if tethered to her healing, while Nicholas kept watching. Emily never looked for an audience, never knew he was there. But he knew. He saw it all. And though his world was built on data, contracts, and measurable returns, for the first time in years, Nicholas Crane found himself trusting something unspoken. Something as fragile as a thread, a connection formed not through blood, but through care. And it all began with a doll, a whisper, and a woman who stayed. And so, Nicholas found himself lingering longer at the hospital. At first, it started with brief, polite questions. A simple, "How is she doing today?" asked in the hallway. Emily, always composed, would respond with clarity and softness. "She ate a little more this morning," she said one day. "And she asked if I'd braid her hair later." "That's a good sign." Nicholas nodded, hands tucked into his coat pockets. "Thank you," he said. And he truly meant it. Later that week, while Sophie was napping, he found Emily in the break room wiping down a table. Her pale blue scrubs were pushed up to her elbows. Her hair was in a messy bun, and a faint coffee stain marked her name tag. He hesitated at the door. "Emily?" She looked up, a brief flicker of surprise crossing her face before it settled into a warm smile. "Mr. Crane." He stepped inside, the space between them holding something unfamiliar, neither awkward nor formal, just real. "I just wanted to say thank you," he began, "for everything you've done for my daughter. I've watched you with her. You've been remarkable. Emily smiled modestly. She's a strong little girl. Very brave. I'm just glad I can be here for her. Nicholas studied her face. There was a warmth in her eyes. Yes. But also something heavier. Something earned. Can I ask you something? He said. She nodded. That doll you gave her. It looked old. Was it yours? Emily paused. Then lowered herself slowly into a chair, gesturing for him to do the same. It was, she said, her fingers lightly tracing a fold in the tablecloth. My mom gave it to me when I was 5. The night before she died. Nicholas sat down across from her. Silent. I was scared. Alone in a hospital bed. She continued. Her voice softer now. She had cancer. She told me the doll would protect me when she couldn't. After she passed. I kept it with me through every foster home. Every hard night. It was the only thing I had left of her. Nicholas listened. His hands resting quietly in his lap. Emily looked up at him. But when your daughter was so afraid, I knew that doll had done what it needed to for me. And maybe it could do the same for her. For a moment, Nicholas couldn't find the words. Then he said quietly, she's being comforted the right way. Emily blinked. Caught off guard. Thank you. Their conversation might have ended there. But just then, the small shuffle of slippered feet interrupted them. Sophie stood at the doorway. Still groggy from sleep. Dragging a soft blanket behind her. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Emily. Miss M. She said with a sleepy smile. Emily was on her feet instantly. Hey. Sunshine. What's wrong? The girl walked over. Arms wide. And wrapped herself around Emily's waist in a tight hug. I had a dream that you weren't here. She whispered. But you are. Emily leaned down. Hugging her back. Her expression full of tenderness. Nicholas watched it unfold. Not as a CEO. Not even as a father. But as a man witnessing something sacred. The child pulled back. Looking up at her father. Then back at Emily. She's my best friend. She declared proudly. Forever. Emily smiled. Blinking rapidly. That's the best title I've ever had. Nicholas felt a weight in his chest he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. This wasn't just care. This was love in its quietest, purest form. And for the first time in years, he understood how deeply it could matter. The pediatric ward was quiet the next morning. A rare kind of quiet that came only after a long night of fevers and restless dreams. Emily walked into the nurse's break room. Yawning behind her hand. Her shift was just starting. And she had arrived early as always. She headed for her locker. Moving with habitual ease until something on the table caught her eye. She stopped. There. Placed gently in the center of the table as if it had been waiting for her. Was a small bundle wrapped in soft, cream-colored tissue paper. Tied with a simple red ribbon. Beside it lay a note. She glanced around. The room was empty. With hesitant fingers. She untied the ribbon and pulled back the paper. Inside was a doll. Small. Hand-stitched. And unmistakably crafted with care. Her dress was pale pink. Her button eyes gleamed gently. And her yarn hair had been braided neatly to one side. Emily's breath caught. It was not an exact replica. But it was so close, the shape. The proportions. Even the slightly crooked smile. Someone had tried to mirror every detail of the old one. But this doll was new. Clean. Unworn by time. As if her past had been lovingly rewritten. She reached for the note. It was written in a careful, masculine script. Thank you for bringing my daughter joy. And for reminding me what it looks like when someone gives from the heart. A grateful father. Emily stood motionless for a long moment. The doll resting in her hands. Her lips curled into a gentle, surprised smile. There was a warmth in her chest. Not from flattery. But from something quieter, recognition. She was seen. Appreciated. Not for what she achieved. But for what she gave. But as her eyes lingered on the doll's familiar button eyes and perfect stitching, a pang tugged at the edges of her heart. She lowered herself into a chair, holding the new doll close. It wasn't just a gift. It was a gesture. One that acknowledged her story. Even if the giver didn't know the full depth of it. Her mind drifted back to the night her mother had handed her the original doll, whispering that it would always protect her. That doll had absorbed her tears, her hopes, her entire childhood. And now, it was gone. In someone else's arms where it belonged. Perhaps. But her hands still felt the absence. The new doll was beautiful and thoughtful. But it wasn't the same. A knock at the door startled her. Nicholas stood there, dressed in his usual dark coat, holding a coffee. His eyes swept the room, pausing on the doll. I hope that was okay, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I asked someone to make it. I wasn't sure what else to do. Emily looked up at him. You remembered every detail. He stepped closer. I had an expert consultant, he said with a faint smile. You're patient. She described the old one with surgical precision. Even the crooked ear. Emily chuckled softly. Then her gaze dropped to the doll again. Nicholas hesitated. You miss it, don't you? She didn't answer right away. Then she said. It was the last piece of my mother I had. His expression softened. I didn't mean to replace it, he said carefully. You didn't. She replied quickly. This is a new beginning. I just didn't expect to say goodbye so soon. You gave it up without a second thought, he observed. I had to, she said simply. She needed it more than I did. That's what made it a gift. Nicholas nodded. They stood in a silence that needed no filling. Until the door opened again and a small voice called out. Miss Emily. Sophie barreled into the room in her flannel pajamas, stopping when she saw the doll in Emily's hands. Oh, she said, wide-eyed. Is that her sister? Emily grinned. Maybe. Want to help me name her? The child nodded, already climbing into her lap. Nicholas watched as the two heads, one golden, one dark, bent together over the new doll. In that quiet, shared moment, he realized something. This woman, sitting in her scrubs with a child in her lap and a handmade doll in her hands, possessed a kind of wealth he had never known. And perhaps the kind he needed most. The spring sunlight streamed gently through the windows of room 412, casting soft lines across the floor. A week earlier, the only light had come from machines and monitors. Now, the beeping was gone. The 4 was removed. And Sophie sat upright in bed, her cheeks full of color, her eyes lively again. She had asked for pancakes that morning and eaten every bite. Emily stood beside her, zipping up her small pink jacket. "You're almost ready to go," she said, brushing a hand through the girl's hair. "Just waiting for the final paperwork." The girl smiled up at her. "I get to go home." Emily nodded, her heart tugging in places she hadn't prepared for. "I'll miss you," she added softly. Sophie didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at the small suitcase on the chair beside her bed. Quietly, she opened it. Tucked gently between her pajamas and a picture book was the faded, hand-stitched doll. The old one. The original. The girl picked it up, cradled it for a moment, then climbed down from the bed with purposeful steps. She walked over to Emily and looked up, holding the doll out between them. "I want you to have her back," she said. Emily blinked. "Are you sure?" The child nodded firmly. "I'm not sick anymore. And I'm not scared now. She helped me when I needed her. But I think she was yours first. And she missed you." Emily dropped to her knees, her hands trembling as she accepted the doll. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for taking such good care of her." The little girl leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Emily's neck. "You're my real nurse, Mommy," she said softly. "And my best friend." Emily held her tightly, her eyes stinging with tears. Behind them, unnoticed at first, Nicholas stood in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched. He watched the way his daughter let go of something that had comforted her through pain and fear. Not out of obligation, but because she knew it would bring someone else joy. He watched the way Emily received it. Not like a returned possession, but like a reunion with a piece of her past. Brought back not with sorrow, but with love. A lump rose in his throat. He had spent years believing that safety came from contracts and security systems. That healing was clinical. But this, what he was witnessing, was something else entirely. It was a giving that cost something. And it was more powerful than anything money had ever bought him. Emily stood slowly, brushing a tear from her cheek, and turned to find Nicholas watching her. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Nicholas stepped forward. "That doll," he said, nodding toward her hands. "She's been through a lot." Emily looked down at it. "She's held me through the worst parts of my life," she said. "I didn't think I'd ever see her again." "And now?" he asked. Emily looked at him, her voice quiet but sure. "Now she's more than a memory. She's part of a story that's still going." Nicholas nodded, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were full of a soft, unspoken admiration. He looked at his daughter, who now twirled near the window, and then back at Emily. "You gave her something I never could," he said. "And I won't forget it." Emily smiled. "She gave me something, too." And in the stillness that followed, something shifted. Not grand. Not loud. But certain. A returned doll. A full heart. And the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. It was nearly sunset when Emily stood in front of the Crane residence. A quiet home tucked away in a tree-lined neighborhood. It was modern but warm. Not the glass fortress she had imagined, but a place that looked lived in. She hesitated at the door, adjusting the hem of the simple, soft dress she had borrowed from a friend. When the door opened, Sophie barreled into view. "Miss Emily," she squealed, flinging her arms around Emily's waist. Emily laughed, bending down to hug her back. "You look like someone who's been waiting." "I set the table," Sophie announced proudly. 3 plates. Nicholas appeared behind her, dressed casually in a navy sweater. He looked lighter somehow, less like the man who loomed behind glass walls. "Come in," he said, with a smile that reached his eyes. The house was warm, filled with the faint scent of herbs and roasted vegetables. The dining table was set near a window, bathed in golden light. 3 plates. As promised. But it was what sat on Emily's chair that made her stop, a small square box wrapped simply with twine. A pressed flower tucked under the knot. She looked at Nicholas. He gestured gently. "Go ahead." She sat down and opened it slowly. Inside was a wooden hair clip, delicately carved into the shape of a doll. Its tiny face was etched with care, its arms outstretched as if ready for a hug. The wood was sanded smooth, warm to the touch. Emily stared at it, lips parting in a silent gasp. "I had one just like this when I was little," she said, her voice hushed. "My mom made it for me before she got sick. It was the only thing I wore on picture days." Nicholas nodded. "I asked a friend to recreate it. Sophie told me what it looked like. She remembered everything." Sophie beamed. She said it made her feel brave. "So, I told Daddy that we should get you another one, in case you need to feel brave again." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat as Nicholas sat across from her. "I didn't know how to thank you," he said. "For what you gave my daughter. For what you gave me. Without even meaning to. I thought maybe this was a way to give a piece of your past back to you. But with new memories attached." Sophie rested her chin on the table and said matter-of-factly, "Daddy says you should eat dinner with us every night. And I think so, too." Emily looked up. Nicholas didn't flinch. He simply reached across the table, offering his hand. She placed hers in his, tentatively at first, then tightened her grip. They shared a meal. Just the 3 of them: roasted chicken, buttery rolls, and laughter that came more easily than any of them expected. At one point, Sophie leaned her head on Emily's arm and whispered, "I hope you stay forever." Emily kissed the top of her head and said, "Me too." Later, as she helped clear the plates, Nicholas stood beside her at the sink. "I don't want to rush anything," he said. "But this house, it feels different with you in it. It feels like a home." Emily looked at him, her heart full. "So does mine." And in the quiet clink of dishes and the smell of lemon soap, they both knew something had begun. Not suddenly, but like all the best things, softly, naturally. Together. 1 year later. The mornings looked different. The house was small. Just 3 bedrooms and a sun-drenched kitchen that always smelled faintly of toast and lemon soap. But it carried the rhythm of a family. Emily stood at the stove flipping pancakes while Sophie sat at the table, swinging her legs and singing softly. Nicholas entered the kitchen, hair slightly tousled, carrying 3 folded napkins and the same amused smirk he always wore when Sophie had on mismatched socks. They weren't perfect mornings, but they were theirs. "Mommy, can I show you now?" Sophie asked suddenly, her eyes lighting up. "Show me what?" "Sweetheart?" Emily asked, turning from the stove. Sophie ran off and returned a moment later, clutching something carefully. It was the old doll, worn and faded, but mended and clean. She carried it to a bookshelf in Emily and Nicholas's shared bedroom and placed it gently between 2 framed photos, one of the 3 of them on the beach, and the other of Emily in her nurse's uniform on the day she'd been promoted to head nurse. "She lives here now," Sophie said proudly. "This is her house, too. I gave her the best spot, right where the sun hits in the morning." Emily knelt beside her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I think she likes it here." Sophie beamed. "She told me. She said it feels like home." Emily glanced at Nicholas, who stood in the doorway, his expression full. That evening, Emily came home from the hospital to find the house filled with the smell of cinnamon. A hand-painted, slightly crooked banner hung over the living room window, "Happy Birthday, Emily." There was no crowd. Just a table set for 3. A carrot cake on the counter, and Nicholas nervously straightening his collar. After dinner, as Sophie ran off to change into her pajamas, Nicholas reached under the table and pulled out a small, deep blue velvet box. He walked to her side and then knelt. Not with spectacle, but with quiet reverence. "I don't have the words to match everything you've given us," he said, his voice steady but low. "I've been thinking about that doll. About how you let her go without knowing if she'd ever come back. You gave her to my daughter because she needed comfort. But you gave us more than that. You gave us safety, family, love." Emily's eyes shimmered as he opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant. A single, small stone was set into a thin gold band, and on either side, the gold was delicately carved into the shape of a doll, with arms open in an embrace. "I know I can't return your past to you," he said. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to build a future where every dinner has 3 chairs. Where the lights are always on for you. And where no one is ever left behind." Emily covered her mouth with her hands, her heart thudding as tears blurred the ring's delicate sparkle. Behind them, Sophie peeked around the corner, eyes wide. "Mommy, say yes. Say yes now." Emily laughed, a sound caught between joy and disbelief. She looked at Nicholas. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger as Sophie rushed in, hugging both their legs. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, under the glow of the banner and the scent of cinnamon. Later, as Emily sat on the couch with Sophie curled against her and Nicholas's arm draped over them both, she looked at the doll on the shelf. Once, It had been all she had. Now, it was just one part of something much greater. A home. Born not from blood or obligation, but from a kindness given without expectation. From a little girl's trust. And from a man who had been watching through glass and one day decided to step inside. Holding Nicholas's hand, she knew she had finally come home. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, it begins with a broken doll and a nurse who gave away the only thing she had left just to calm a frightened little girl. And in doing so, she opened the door to a new family. A new beginning. And a love she never thought she deserved. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every week we bring you true-to-life tales that heal, inspire, and remind us all that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Thank you for watching. And remember, love is always closer than you think.